This video is for anyone studying Wilfred Owen's poem, The Send-Off. I'm going to focus on the social and historical context first, and then I'm going to move on to the ways that the tone of the poem is ominous and that the speaker in the poem feels bitter and disdainful. You should have a copy of the poem in front of you while you listen. The first thing you should know about Wilfred Owen as you read this poem is that he was diagnosed with shell shock during the war, and he was sent here to Craig-Lockhart's hospital. After he was discharged, he was given permission to remain on home leave indefinitely, but he felt very strongly that his place was in the war with his men and that he would have felt terrible if he'd stayed at home while they fought on. So he returned to the war voluntarily. You might think that this is relevant when you think about the way that the poem is very bitter and disdainful towards the people who stay at home while the soldiers are sent off to the front. If you're interested in knowing more about Wilfred Owen's time at Craig-Lockhart Hospital, a good place to start would be Pat Barker's very well-researched historical novel, Regeneration. It's also relevant to think about the recruitment methods of the British Army when you're reading this poem. Until 1916, signing up to the army was voluntary, and it was encouraged through posters like these that you might have heard referred to as propaganda posters. After 1916, if you were a single, unmarried man without children, signing up was compulsory. You were conscripted. It might be worth thinking about what Wilfred Owen's attitudes towards this kind of recruitment methods were, given that he was a volunteer and he felt that it was his duty and his responsibility to go to the front and to volunteer. However, he might also have been upset about a disinterested government who doesn't care about these young men, forcing them to go to the front. It's up to you to reflect on that as you read the poem and analyse the language. Another thing to reflect on as you read this poem is Wilfred Owen's attitudes towards the women in the poem. Women were often used in recruitment posters at the time, and there was a rhetoric around protecting women and women encouraging soldiers to go. Have a think as you read this poem about what Wilfred Owen might have felt about these women or the government's use of these women's images. Next, I'm going to focus on three quotations that create, for me, an ominous tone in the poem. In the opening line, Owen refers to the darkening lanes. For me, his use of the present tense continuous here, of darkening as an adjective, is interesting because he's not said dark lanes, he's said darkening, which implies that the world is getting darker, things are getting worse, and for me that emphasises an ominous tone. Secondly, when referring to the white flowers that are pinned onto the soldiers as the women bid them goodbye, Owen implies that they remind him of funeral flowers that are put into the buttonholes of dead bodies. Owen here foreshadows the deaths of these soldiers as they wave goodbye. He emphasises this foreshadowing by putting the word dead at the end of the line and at the end of a stanza, if you count those two lines there together as a stanza. He doesn't say dead men's are, he says that men's are dead, and for me, the position of this word in the sentence emphasises it. Finally, Wilfred Owen asks a rhetorical question in the final stanza about how these men are going to be greeted back to their village when the war is over. He answers it with a few, too few. This repetition of the word few and the qualifying it of too few emphasises for me what a waste of life these young men are going to demonstrate. He also says that they're going to creep back to their homes. This emphasises for me the bleak image of the future that he's trying to create, a bleakness that the people who are waving off these soldiers and the soldiers themselves seem to be blissfully unaware of at this point. Finally, and linked to everything I've said before, I argue that in this poem, Wilfred Owen is ambivalent and somewhat disdainful towards the people who stay at home in this poem, the people who are doing the sending off. For example, he asks whether the soldiers are at the front now and whether they are mocking what women meant who gave them flowers. This idea that the soldiers would now mock the women at home displays Owen's attitude that the people at home don't really understand what the soldiers are going through, and the uselessness of the fact that the women pinned flowers onto these soldiers who were going to fight a war. He also uses very stark and uncomplicated language. You'll struggle to find a polysyllabic word in this poem, which I think emphasises just how bitter and angry he's feeling. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Feel free to subscribe if you'd like to keep updated on videos that I upload. Also feel free to comment below if you'd like to disagree with anything, add anything, or ask any questions.